Hello everybody, I'm Bitter, and I'm here to review episodes 21, 22, and 23 of Thomas & Friends Season 1. Let's just jump into it. Season 1, Episode 21, Toby and the Stout Gentleman. Toby is a tram engine. He doesn't look much like a steam engine at all. He serves the villages and farms along his line and always takes his coach Henrietta with him. But times are hard on the tramway. There's less trucks, and Henrietta hardly ever gets a passenger. Roads are taking over from the tramway, but when it comes to safety, you can't match Toby. Cars and buses have accidents all the time, but Toby hasn't had one for years. One day, a family was on Toby's platform. This was the Fat Controller, of course, but Toby couldn't know that. His grandchildren asked him to take a look at the engine.
That's a tram engine, Stephen. Is it electric? Shh, shh, shh. You've offended him.
Despite this, the kids still want to ride behind him, so they do. Henrietta's just happy to have passengers, but Toby's still hurt over the electric comment, grumbling as they leave. At the next station, though, the Fat Controller gets out to speak with the engine, asking his name and thanking him for a pleasant ride. Toby felt better now and thought about how this gentleman really knows how to speak to engines. The children came every day for a fortnight, sometimes riding with the guard, sometimes in empty trucks. But on their last day, the driver invited them into the cab. Everyone was sad when it was time for them to leave. Toby asked them to come again soon, and the family promised that they would. But they didn't know how bad things were on the tramway. Months passed. Toby had fewer and fewer trucks and passengers. On his last day, the townsfolk came out to have one last ride. The passengers joked and sang, but for Toby and his driver, it was a sad, quiet event. Everyone said they're sorry for his line closing down, but back at the shed, he had nothing to think about, except for how nobody wanted him. His crew shut his shed doors, and he went unhappily to sleep. For all Toby knew, this was the end for him. The next morning, though, his crew flung open his shed doors, his driver waving a letter above his head. All sorts of excited. It's a letter from the Stout Gentleman. But I can't tell you any more, or I'll spoil the next story. Review time. The music is great as usual. Toby's theme is just so nice. It feels content? Comfortable. I'm not sure how to describe it, but it's very nice. Visuals in this episode are amazing. There's mountains, cliffs, castle ruins, as well as a little run along a lake. I love these sets, and I wish we could see more of them, but this is a totally separate railway, which means they won't appear again, and that no sets from the main railways should be here. Wait a minute. Windmill spotted. Aside from that one problem, even Toby's little shed looks great. The scrap metal, wheels, and old rusted cab tell stories from a time long gone. Toby's little railway looks even more like it's from a storybook than the rest of the show. Even the backdrops are different. I gotta wonder how that cab got here. Toby's got a one-engine shed, which means either he replaced an engine and they were cut up, leaving only the cab, or was Toby a tank engine at some point and not a tram? But Toby's meant to be a J70. He should always have been a tram. Toby, who did you kill? There's not much to say about the characters here, so I'll wrap it in with the story. Toby is a sort of cheerful old man type, but he does take offense to things. How dare you call him electric? He has years of experience pulling both passengers and trucks, and he doesn't seem to mind working with either. He's just happy to keep busy. Hard work makes a healthy railway after all, and it's sad to say he ran out of hard work to do. There was less and less for him as cars and buses became more common, and with trucks taking his goods by road, he had nothing. He had lost all hope by the end of the episode, but that doesn't mean he's weak of mind or will. He has watched his tramway, his home, decline for years, and then he watched it close. There was no hope left to have. There was no fighting he could do to make it better. As far as we know, this is the only place he's ever worked. It is everything he's ever had. The Fat Controller is seen to be a slightly different man here. His softer side comes out with his grandkids. He's very polite with Toby, and as Toby says, he really knows how to talk to engines. And how to save them, apparently. This is the first of many he saves. We get the entirety of Toby's story, his whole old life here in one episode, and it feels just about right. It translates to TV very smoothly. It feels like it was meant to be captured in a single short story, and at least, to me, it's special. 9 out of 10. Sad stories in this show really hit hard. Season 1, Episode 22, Thomas in Trouble. This episode starts as another slice of life episode for Thomas, and it opens with good visuals. There's a line to a quarry at the end of Thomas's branch line. It runs along the road for a bit, so Thomas is always very careful here, and remembers to use his whistle so everybody knows he's coming. Thomas got along well with the police officer who worked near his railway. However, that officer had retired, and today a new one was resting near the line. Thomas whistled him a good morning, but the new officer was furious. He yelled about how he couldn't sleep last night, and now Thomas's whistle woke him up and ruined his peace and quiet. Thomas remained polite, saying that he was sorry and keeping a smile on his face. The officer pointed out Thomas not having cow catchers or side plates, asking where they are.
But I don't catch cows, sir.
When he found out they'd made this quarry trip hundreds of times, he was even more angry.
That makes it worse.
Thomas was quite upset as he rolled away. Elsewhere, the Fat Controller was having breakfast at home with his wife, when the butler came in to tell him he had a call to take.
Bother that telephone, said the Fat Controller. I'm sorry, my dear. Thomas is in trouble with the police, and I must go at once.
Dangerous to the public, indeed. We'll see about that. He spoke to the policeman and came to the conclusion that arguing with him would be useless. He apologized to the driver and considered making cow catchers for Thomas. They'll say I look like a tram. This statement sparked a memory in the Fat Controller, and he laughed. He recounted meeting Toby to Thomas, so he wrote to his controller. A few days later, Toby arrived with Henrietta. The Fat Controller didn't mind that he brought her along, so Toby got right to work. He made the trucks behave even better than Thomas did, and Thomas was jealous, but when Toby scared the police officer, he was fully won over.
Oi, you!
Review time. I'll be skipping over music because there's nothing new or special in this one, that I noticed at least. Visuals are awesome though. We have a couple of new sets, cool angles, and an interesting train arrangement. So the first set must be just on the way out of the quarry. Look at these old buildings and the junk laying around. It's all dusty and worn. Thomas is pulling a train of 4 trucks with Annie and Clarabelle at the back. I imagine this is just to use Clarabelle's brakes because she is a brake coach. It's a really cool setup. There's this lower angled shot where we watch the train pass and it feels quite industrial. We get a new crossing over the road. This road must be dirt or gravel with all these tracks in it. This policeman is really tall when you look at him next to Thomas's crew, and it is mentioned in the episode that he's large. I suppose this must have been on purpose. It's neat, even if it wasn't. We see inside of the Fat Controller's house, at least the dining room. With a chandelier like that and an actual butler, you just know he's got way more money than he knows what to do with. This is all practical effects, real set building. Good stuff. I think I'm out of things to say for the visuals, but pretty impressive list for an episode that's just 4.5 minutes long. They killed it this time. At some point, I said I was planning to keep my reviews brief. I'm sorry for not doing that. Anyway, on to the story. This is really simple, and it's hard to talk about it without the context of the last episode. If the last one didn't happen, you'd be quite confused as to where Sir Topham pulled this tram engine from. On its own, though, there is something to it. There was a change to the world around Thomas, even if it seems like a small one. The change posed a threat of changing his way of life in a significant manner, changing how he looks, and changing how he interacts with the other engines. In the end, his image remained unaffected, because the Fat Controller was carrying this square wild card with him. The story isn't super special, but there's a very usable structure here. For characters, Thomas's jealousy continues here, from when he last had someone else on his branch line. It's a concern to him that his way of life could be challenged, but also he wasn't all that hard to win over. When Toby scared the officer, Thomas warmed right up to him. As for Toby, he's got the chance he so desperately needed. He brought Henrietta. Now, I don't think the Fat Controller bought Henrietta, but Toby cared about her deeply, so he risked it and figured it was better to beg forgiveness than ask permission. For all he knew, the Fat Controller could have had her scrapped, or just sent back. But it was worth trying anyway, and it worked out. The Fat Controller gets fleshed out a bit here as well. We see a bit of his home life. He has one hell of a home, and he enjoys having breakfast with his wife before he gets started for the day. He's annoyed when he gets called, and apologizes that he has to leave early. Also, he's got a butler. It makes sense, I suppose, when you run an entire railway, but there's not many people who could afford one of those these days. Or back then, for that matter. When he found arguing with the police to be useless, he went ahead and just bought a whole locomotive to solve the problem. He doesn't fix anything halfway, clearly. And when the idea struck him, he laughed, probably out of relief. He has to be under absolutely crippling stress because whenever a big problem happens on the railway, he has to go solve it himself. And yet he enjoys the simple things, like vacations with his grandchildren, or toast and marmalade in the morning. Overall, the episode is a 6 out of 10 when it could be an 8 or a 9. The story has a whole lot of potential, but it ended with little to no character development, and if it weren't for the fantastic visuals, this episode would commit the biggest sin any media can make: being boring. The situation that's posed in the episode has potential to be very interesting, but it's kind of brushed away by just buying Toby. It's bland on its own, but it's absolutely critical to future episodes that are much better. Give Toby some room to breathe. He's better next season. Actually, he's better this season. For now, we can just enjoy his theme. Season 1, Episode 23, Dirty Objects. Toby and Henrietta were enjoying their new life on the branch line, but they are old-fashioned and need new paint. James always made rude comments whenever he saw them. When Toby finally had enough, he hit James with a bootlaces joke. He had a good laugh, and James left in a huff. James was still thinking about it at the end of the line when he left his coaches and started pulling a slow freight. He hated this sort of work. Starting with only a few, he picked up more and more trucks at each station. The trucks behaved well, but James bumped them, and they wanted revenge. At the top of the hill, all trains are meant to stop and pin down brakes, so there isn't a runaway. James had forgotten this, and was too busy thinking about what he would say to Toby to listen to his driver. The trucks got their chance and pushed him down the hill at an immense speed. Just on the other side of Marin Station, he collided with tar wagons. The tar wagons and some of James's trucks were destroyed, and James was fine, but covered in tar. It was Toby and Percy, of course, who came to help him, and the two little engines made fun of James relentlessly while he pretended he wasn't listening. They cleaned up the mess and helped James home. The Fat Controller was quite pleased with Toby and Percy's work, and he told James he wasn't fit to be seen. The Fat Controller told Toby he'd get a new coat of paint, and when Toby asked if Henrietta could have new paint as well, the Fat Controller, still in a good mood, said yes. All James could do was sit there and look funny as Toby ran off happily. Review time. This one's a bit better. Not much to say for music again, and for the most part the visuals are nothing special, but the runaway scene was entertaining, and the crash was suitably chaotic. A good accident will always make me like an episode much more. Sure, it's not Henry folding up a brake van in the morning sunrise, but it made a big bang and a big mess, so of course I'm gonna like it. The story is fairly light-hearted, and the characters are all where they should be. James is more concerned with his appearance and pride than anything, and it leads to him making a mess of things again. James ruining things for himself is an absolute constant in this season. Poor guy got only 2 wins, and they came off the back of several bad events. And that's where we'll start for characters. The choice to have James and Toby in an episode together was wonderful. There isn't a single better character to pair Toby with if you want chaos. In this episode, we see that Toby is a bit chaotic. He's totally okay with others making bad choices and suffering the consequences of their actions. James was antagonizing him and his coach. He could have tried to reason with James, like Edward may have, but he just got him even more angry and sent him on his way. He bounced perfectly off of Percy as well. They're both jokesters in their own ways, and we see them getting along very well and making fun of James. At the end of the episode, we see Toby running off with a smile and James sitting here covered in tar. A lesson has been learned, hopefully, but James seems to struggle with those. So Toby's a chaotic old man, James is still too concerned with his looks, and the Fat Controller didn't even look angry. He was smiling when Toby and Percy brought James home, and he smiled all the way through the conversation. He's not even mad this time. I can only assume he finds the whole mess funny. Overall, 8 out of 10. Good character dynamic, fun crash, but far from the best this series has to offer. Alright guys, thanks for watching. The final part of this season's review will be out this month. See y'all next week with whatever I conjure up next.